June 14, 1944. 0523 hours. 7 kilometers southwest of Saint-Lô, France. Private First Class Leo Ward lay flat in a drainage ditch, mud soaking through his wool uniform, watching the narrow farm road that cut through the hedgerow country like a vein through tissue. The fog hung low and thick, the kind that muffled sound and reduced visibility to 30 meters. Somewhere beyond the gray curtain, a German armored scout car was moving. He could hear the engine growl, the clatter of steel treads on gravel, the mechanical whine of a vehicle designed to move fast, report back, and disappear before anyone could respond. Leo did not move. His rifle lay beside him, useless against 4 centimeters of sloped armor plate. His grenades were spent. His bazooka team was dead. The last 3 men who tried to stop a scout car with small arms fire had been cut down by mounted MG-34 bursts before they got within 50 meters. The doctrine said to call artillery or air support. But artillery took 10 minutes to coordinate. Air support needed clear skies. And by the time either arrived, the scout car would already be gone, its crew radioing coordinates back to German gun batteries that would flatten the American position within the hour. Leo had grown up in central Kansas, on a farm where machinery broke constantly and replacement parts never arrived on time. His father taught him to fix things with whatever was available. Baling wire. Scrap iron. Rusted wheel spokes salvaged from abandoned wagons. When a tractor axle snapped, you did not wait for a mechanic. You built a solution from junk and kept working. That mentality did not translate well to military doctrine. The Army wanted approved methods, standardized equipment, and obedience to procedure. But Leo had watched too many men die following rules that made no sense in the field. 3 days earlier, Corporal Danny Reese had been killed by a scout car on this same road. Danny had been a mechanic from Ohio, a man who understood engines and loved to talk about torque ratios and compression cycles. He had stepped out from cover to throw a Molotov cocktail at a passing vehicle. The bottle shattered against the armored hull, flames spreading uselessly across steel plating, and the gunner had raked him with machine gun fire before he could retreat. Danny died in the ditch, choking on blood, his hands still clutching the empty bottle. Leo had dragged his body back to the line and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The next day, Private Eugene Cross tried to disable a scout car with a satchel charge. He timed his throw poorly. The charge detonated 5 meters behind the vehicle, kicking up dirt and shrapnel but leaving the car intact. The crew stopped, reversed, and machine-gunned Eugene while he reloaded his rifle. His body was recovered that evening. No eulogy. No ceremony. Just another name added to the casualty list and another hole in the unit roster. On the 3rd day, Sergeant William Hoffman ordered a bazooka team to ambush a scout car at dawn. The team set up on a low hill overlooking the road, waiting for the vehicle to enter their kill zone. But the car never slowed. It moved too fast, too unpredictably, weaving between ruts and hedgerows. The bazooka round missed by 2 meters. The crew did not. The scout car's gunner identified the launch signature, radioed the position, and 15 minutes later a German 105mm howitzer barrage obliterated the hill. 4 men died. The bazooka team. A medic. A forward observer who had been calling in coordinates for counter-battery fire. Leo watched all of it. He saw men follow doctrine and die. He saw officers repeat the same tactics and expect different results. And he understood that if something did not change, more men would die for no reason other than obedience to a manual written by people who had never seen a German scout car moving at 40 kilometers per hour through fog. So he decided to build a trap. Leo Ward had been born in 1924, in a town called Hays, Kansas, population 8,000, where the wind never stopped and the soil turned to dust every summer. His father ran a small farm, growing wheat and corn on land that required constant maintenance. Machinery broke often. Fences collapsed. Wagons lost wheels. And because money was scarce and mechanics were expensive, Leo learned to fix everything himself. By age 12, he could disassemble a tractor engine, identify the damaged parts, and fabricate replacements using scrap metal and a forge. By 15, he had rebuilt 3 combine harvesters using parts salvaged from a junkyard 30 miles away. His father never praised him. Praise was not part of the culture. But Leo understood that his skill kept the farm running, and that was enough. When he turned 18, the draft notice arrived. He reported to Fort Riley, completed basic training, and deployed to Europe in May 1944 as part of the 29th Infantry Division. He did not want to be a soldier. He did not care about glory or medals. But he understood that the war would not end until someone won, and he preferred that someone to be the side that did not execute civilians in occupied villages. He arrived in Normandy 2 weeks after D-Day, assigned to a rifle company tasked with pushing inland through the hedgerow country. The terrain was brutal. Every field was surrounded by thick earthen walls topped with dense vegetation, creating natural fortifications that turned every 100 meters into a separate battle. Visibility was limited. Movement was slow. And German forces used the terrain to devastating effect, setting up machine gun nests, sniper positions, and mortar teams that could strike and withdraw before the Americans could respond. The scout cars were the worst. They moved freely along the narrow farm roads, gathering intelligence, calling artillery strikes, and vanishing before anyone could engage them. The Americans had no effective counter. Mines were in short supply. Bazookas required skilled operators and clear lines of sight. Tank destroyers were too slow to catch fast-moving recon vehicles. And air support was useless in the fog that blanketed the region every morning. Men died. Not in dramatic charges or heroic last stands, but in sudden, meaningless bursts of machine gun fire from vehicles they never saw coming. And the officers kept repeating the same advice. Stay low. Wait for support. Follow doctrine. But doctrine was not stopping the scout cars. It was just getting people killed. Leo decided that if the army would not solve the problem, he would. The trap was simple. Almost embarrassingly simple. But simplicity was the point. Complex devices required maintenance, skilled operators, and time to deploy. Leo needed something that could be built from scrap, installed in minutes, and left unattended until it killed something. He started with a rusted wheel spoke salvaged from a destroyed French farm wagon. The spoke was 60 centimeters long, made of forged iron, tapered at one end and blunt at the other. He spent 2 hours sharpening the tapered end using a file and a whetstone, creating a pointed tip capable of penetrating rubber and lodging in mechanical components. Then he drilled a hole through the blunt end and threaded a steel cable through it, forming a loop. The cable was scavenged from a downed German observation balloon. It was 7 millimeters thick, braided steel, rated for high tensile loads. Leo cut a 12-meter length end, anchored one end to a tree on the north side of the farm road. The other end, attached to the wheel spoke, he stretched across the road at a height of 20 centimeters, just low enough to pass beneath the chassis of a jeep or truck but high enough to catch the exposed axle of a low-slung armored scout car. The tension was critical. Too loose and the cable would drag harmlessly beneath the vehicle. Too tight and it would snap on impact. Leo adjusted the cable using a ratchet mechanism salvaged from a cargo tie-down, testing the tension by hand until it felt right. Not scientific. Not precise. Just right. He positioned the wheel spoke on the south side of the road, angled forward so that an approaching vehicle would drive into the point rather than deflecting it. Then he covered the cable with a thin layer of dirt and leaves, rendering it invisible in low light. The entire setup took 90 minutes. No approval. No paperwork. No consultation with engineers or explosive ordnance specialists. Just a farm kid with a plan and a refusal to watch more men die. Leo tested the height 3 times before committing to the installation. He lay on his back beneath the stretched cable, measuring the clearance with his hands. 20 centimeters gave enough room for a Jeep's differential but would catch the lower slung chassis of a German scout car. He checked the angle of the wheel spoke again, making sure the point was oriented directly into the path of approaching traffic. He tugged on the cable, feeling for weak points in the braid. He inspected the anchor tree, confirming the trunk was thick enough to withstand the force of a sudden stop. Everything had to be perfect. One miscalculation and the trap would fail. Worse, it might kill the wrong people. American supply trucks used these roads. Ambulances. Courier motorcycles. Leo could not risk friendly casualties. So he memorized the location, planned to warn his platoon in the morning, and made a mental note to mark the trap's position on a hand-drawn map he kept in his jacket. When he finished, he stepped back and examined his work. The cable was invisible. The wheel spoke blended with roadside debris. The anchor points were hidden. Unless someone knew to look for it, the trap did not exist. Leo returned to his foxhole and slept for 3 hours. He did not dream. He never did. The first test came at dawn on June 15, 1944. Leo was not present. He had installed the trap the previous night and returned to his platoon's position 300 meters east. He did not tell anyone what he had done. Partly because he knew it would be rejected. Partly because he wanted to see if it worked before wasting time defending it. At 0612 hours, a German SD KFZ 222 armored scout car entered the road from the west. Four-wheeled. Rear-wheel drive. Open-topped turret mounting a 20mm autocannon and a coaxial MG-34 machine gun. Crew of 3. Top speed 50 km per hour on paved roads, slower on dirt. The vehicle was designed for reconnaissance, not combat. Its armor was thin, rated to stop rifle rounds but vulnerable to anything larger. Its strength was speed and mobility. It could scout a position, report back, and withdraw before enemy forces could organize a response. The car moved cautiously, the driver scanning for obstacles, the gunner sweeping the turret left and right. Fog still covered the valley. Visibility was poor. The crew did not see the cable. The vehicle's front axle passed over the wire. The rear axle caught it. The wheel spoke, angled forward and sharpened to a point, punched through the rubber tire and jammed into the axle housing. The cable, tensioned and anchored to a tree, pulled taut. The ratchet mechanism held. And the entire rear axle assembly locked instantly. Physics did the rest. The Scout car's rear wheels stopped rotating. The front wheels did not. The vehicle's momentum carried it forward while the rear end remained fixed, creating a rotational force around the jammed axle. The car flipped forward, nose over tail, the turret slamming into the dirt road with enough force to crush the gunner's skull. The driver was thrown clear, his body hitting a hedgerow and breaking 3 ribs. The commander, trapped in the turret, died on impact. The wreck burned for 20 minutes. American infantry moved in cautiously, recovered intelligence documents from the vehicle, and reported the incident as a probable mine strike. No one investigated further. The cable remained hidden beneath dirt and debris. Leo heard the explosion from his position. He did not react. He did not tell anyone. He simply noted that the Scout car had not returned, and that no artillery strike followed. But he did walk to the site later that afternoon. He approached carefully, staying low, watching for German response teams. The wreck was still smoldering. The turret was crumpled. The rear axle was bent at a 45-degree angle, the wheel spoke still lodged in the housing. The cable had held. The anchor tree showed scorch marks but no structural damage. Leo studied the wreck for 5 minutes, noting what had worked and what could be improved. The cable height was correct. The wheel spoke had penetrated as expected. But the flip had been violent, more so than he had anticipated. The vehicle had rotated a full 180 degrees before impacting the ground. Leo wondered if a lighter vehicle would flip differently. Or if a half-track with its tracked rear wheels would react the same way. He made mental notes. Then he left. He did not salvage parts from the wreck. He did not take souvenirs. He simply walked back to his position and waited for the next Scout car. 3 days later, a second Scout car flipped on a different road 5 kilometers north. Same setup. Same result. Cable across the road. Wheel spoke through the axle. Vehicle flipped. Crew dead. This time an officer noticed. Lieutenant Marcus Holland, a West Point graduate with 6 months of combat experience, inspected the wreck personally. He found the cable. He found the wheel spoke. He found the anchor point. And he immediately ordered an investigation to determine who had installed an unauthorized anti-vehicle obstruction in a combat zone without approval from battalion engineers. No one claimed responsibility. But word spread quickly through the enlisted ranks. Someone had found a way to stop the Scout cars. Someone had built a trap from junk that worked better than doctrine. And soldiers, tired of watching friends die, began copying the design. The first imitators were clumsy. They used the wrong cable gauge. They positioned the wheel spoke incorrectly. They set the height too low or too high. 3 traps failed in the first week because the cable snapped on impact. 2 more failed because the anchor points pulled free. 1 trap caught a friendly jeep, injuring the driver and passenger. That incident nearly ended the experiment before it began. But the soldiers learned. They observed Leo's original setup, studied the geometry, tested different materials. They discovered that balloon cable worked better than parachute cord. That anchor points needed to be at least 30 centimeters in diameter to handle the load. That the wheel spoke had to be angled forward at precisely 15 degrees to ensure penetration rather than deflection. Within 2 weeks, spoke traps appeared on 8 different roads. Some used wheel spokes. Others used sharpened rebar or salvaged bayonets. A few innovative soldiers used broken axles from destroyed German vehicles, turning the enemy's own equipment against them. The cable came from balloon tethers, cargo netting, or parachute harnesses. The anchor points varied. Trees, fence posts, buried stakes driven 3 feet into the ground. But the principle remained the same. Low cable. Sharp obstruction. High tension. Jam the axle. Flip the car. German recon activity dropped by 40% in 3 weeks. American casualties from Scout car ambushes dropped by 60%. Artillery strikes, which relied on accurate forward observation, became less frequent and less effective. German gunners, lacking reliable intelligence, fired blind barrages that wasted ammunition and killed fewer targets. And battalion command became furious. On June 24, 1944, Captain Richard Osborne issued General Order 19, prohibiting the use of improvised anti-vehicle obstructions within the battalion's area of operations. The order cited safety concerns, lack of standardization, and interference with friendly vehicle movement. Soldiers were instructed to remove all unauthorized traps immediately and report any further installations to their commanding officers. The order was ignored. Men kept building traps. Officers pretended not to notice. And the scout cars kept flipping. Captain Osborne was a career officer, 32 years old, with a degree in military science from the University of Virginia. He had served in North Africa and Sicily before Normandy, earning a Bronze Star for organizing a successful defensive perimeter under artillery fire. He believed in discipline, hierarchy, and the principle that orders existed for good reasons. Improvised weapons violated those principles. They introduced chaos into a system designed to function through coordination and control. His concerns were not entirely unfounded. The traps did pose risks. Friendly vehicles had to be warned about trap locations. Convoy routes had to be planned around known installations. Engineers complained that they were spending more time managing improvised obstructions than laying proper minefields. And the legal implications were murky. International law governed the use of landmines and booby traps. Did a cable and spike trap qualify? If a French civilian stumbled into one and died, who was responsible? The soldier who built it? The officer who failed to remove it? The division commander who tolerated it? Captain Osborne escalated. He ordered military police to patrol the roads, identify trap locations, and dismantle them. He threatened disciplinary action against anyone caught installing unauthorized devices. He filed reports with division headquarters, arguing that rogue engineering efforts were undermining operational control and creating legal liability. His argument rested on 3 points. First, the traps posed a danger to friendly forces. American jeeps and supply trucks used the same roads as German scout cars. If a driver failed to spot the cable, an Allied vehicle could flip just as easily as an enemy one. Second, the traps violated established engineering protocols. Combat obstructions required approval from ordnance specialists who understood blast patterns, structural loads, and fail-safe mechanisms. A device built by an untrained soldier could malfunction catastrophically. Third, the traps created command and control problems. If every private could deploy homemade weapons without oversight, the chain of command became meaningless. Division headquarters agreed. On July 2, 1944, a formal directive was issued, banning all improvised anti-vehicle traps and ordering immediate compliance. Engineers were dispatched to remove existing installations. Platoon leaders were instructed to enforce the policy strictly. Military police arrived in convoys, carrying wire cutters and sledgehammers. They worked methodically, moving from road to road, cutting cables and pulling anchor stakes. Soldiers watched in silence. Some protested. Most did not. They understood that arguing with military police was pointless. The traps came down. And men started dying again. July 5, 1944. 2 American patrols, moving along previously secured roads, were ambushed by German scout cars. 8 men killed. 14 wounded. No traps had been in place. The cars had moved freely, gathered intelligence, and withdrawn without resistance. The patrol leader, Sergeant Thomas Breck, filed an after-action report. He noted that the road had been clear of obstructions and that the scout car had operated with unusual confidence, suggesting the crew knew the area was no longer defended by traps. Breck recommended reinstating the spoke traps immediately. His report was filed and ignored. July 7, 1944. A forward observation post was overrun after a scout car identified its location and called in mortar fire. 5 men dead. The position had been considered secure because previous recon efforts had been disrupted by spoke traps. Without the traps, the Germans had operated freely. The observation post had been dug into a hillside overlooking a key intersection. Its purpose was to monitor German troop movements and direct artillery fire onto enemy supply convoys. For 2 weeks, the position had been safe. German scout cars had avoided the area, deterred by traps on every approach road. But when the traps were removed, the scout cars returned. 1 vehicle spotted the observation post, radioed coordinates, and withdrew. 10 minutes later, a mortar barrage destroyed the position. The forward observer, his radio operator, and 3 riflemen died instantly. July 9, 1944. A supply convoy was intercepted by 2 scout cars, resulting in the loss of 3 trucks, medical supplies and ammunition. The convoy had been routed along a road previously protected by a spoke trap that had been removed under orders. The convoy commander, Lieutenant James Rucker, survived the attack. He reported that the scout cars had approached at high speed, disabled the lead truck with autocannon fire, and machine-gunned the following vehicles before withdrawing. The attack lasted 90 seconds. 6 men died. 12 were wounded. The convoy's cargo, which included plasma, morphine, and rifle ammunition, was destroyed. Casualty reports began circulating. Officers compared death tolls before and after the ban. The numbers were undeniable. More men died without the traps than with them. Leo watched the body count climb. He said nothing in official channels. But on the night of July 10, he rebuilt 3 traps along roads his unit used for patrol routes. He installed them after midnight, worked alone, and told no one. By dawn, the cables were hidden and the anchor points concealed. He was not the only one. Across the battalion, soldiers quietly reinstalled traps. They worked in pairs, moving silently through the darkness, carrying coils of cable and sharpened stakes. They positioned the traps on secondary roads, dirt paths, and logging trails where German scout cars were known to operate. They marked the locations on hand-drawn maps and warned their squads to avoid those routes. The next morning, a German SDKFZ 250 half-track scout vehicle hit one of the traps. The vehicle did not flip completely, but the wheel spoke jammed the front axle hard enough to throw the driver into the steering column and kill him instantly. The vehicle careened into a ditch. The crew abandoned it. American infantry captured 2 prisoners and recovered maps showing German artillery positions. Lieutenant Holland traced the trap back to Leo's sector. He confronted Leo directly, demanding to know if he had violated the order. Leo said nothing. Holland threatened him with court-martial. Leo still said nothing. Holland walked away. He filed no charges. 2 days later, another trap appeared on a different road. Holland did not investigate. Other soldiers followed Leo's example. Quietly. At night. Without orders or approval. Traps reappeared across the battalion's operational area. Platoon sergeants pretended not to notice. Company commanders filed reports claiming the traps were remnants from earlier installations that had been missed during removal operations. Division staff suspected the truth but did not press the issue. The scout cars started flipping again. On July 12, 1944, a field engineer named Lieutenant Paul Hendricks submitted a formal analysis to division headquarters. Hendricks was a civil engineer from Oregon who had spent 3 years designing bridge foundations before the war. He understood load-bearing calculations, material stress tolerances, and structural failure modes. And he recognized that the spoke trap, despite its crude appearance, was mechanically sound. His report was 18 pages long, typed on a portable Remington typewriter in a tent lit by kerosene lamps. It included photographs of destroyed scout cars, diagrams of the trap mechanism, and statistical data comparing casualty rates during periods when traps were active versus inactive. He calculated that the spoke trap had a 92% success rate when properly installed. He noted that friendly vehicle losses to the traps were 0, because American drivers knew the roads and avoided trap zones. He documented that German recon effectiveness had dropped by 67% during the 3-week period when traps were widely deployed. Hendricks also addressed the legal concerns. He cited Army Field Manual 5-31, which defined booby traps as explosive devices triggered by victim action. The spoke trap was not explosive. It was a mechanical obstruction, similar to a caltrops or abatis, both of which were recognized as legitimate battlefield obstructions under international law. He argued that the trap posed no greater risk to civilians than a landmine or artillery shell, both of which were deployed routinely without legal controversy. His conclusion was direct. The traps worked. The ban did not. Division staff reviewed the report. They consulted with ordnance specialists, reviewed field data, and acknowledged that improvised solutions, while unconventional, had proven more effective than existing doctrine. On July 15, 1944, the ban was quietly lifted. Engineers were authorized to study the trap design, standardize components, and distribute approved versions to frontline units. The device was renamed. Officially, it became known as a rotating axle wire obstruction or RAW. Unofficially, soldiers still called it the spoke trap. Production models used standardized steel cable, machined anchor bolts, and hardened steel spikes instead of rusted wheel spokes. Installation kits were distributed to engineer platoons across the division. Training manuals included diagrams and deployment guidelines. The trap became part of doctrine. And Leo Ward's name never appeared in any report. The standardized version was more refined than Leo's original design. Engineers replaced the wheel spoke with a machined steel spike 20 centimeters long, with a pyramid-shaped tip designed to penetrate tire treads and lock into axle housings. The cable was upgraded to 9mm braided steel, rated for 8,000 pounds of tensile load. Anchor bolts were threaded and designed to screw into pre-drilled stakes driven 4 feet into the ground. The entire kit weighed 6 kilograms and could be installed by 2 men in under 20 minutes. But the principle remained unchanged. Low cable. Sharp spike. High tension. Jam the axle. Flip the car. By August, spoke traps were standard equipment in 3 American divisions. By September, British forces had adopted a similar design. By October, reports from the Eastern Front suggested that Soviet engineers were experimenting with their own version, using railroad spikes and telegraph wire. The trap had evolved from a desperate improvisation into an accepted weapon of war. The Germans noticed. By late July, scout car crews began reporting unusual axle failures on roads that had previously been clear. Intelligence officers analyzed the pattern. They recovered fragments of cable and steel spikes from disabled vehicles. They concluded that the Americans had deployed a new type of anti-vehicle obstruction. German engineers responded with countermeasures. Some scout cars were retrofitted with reinforced axle guards, steel plates welded beneath the chassis to deflect cables. Others installed wire cutters on the front bumper, angled blades designed to sever taut cables before they could engage the axle. Some crews simply avoided narrow roads entirely, restricting their recon operations to open fields and wide boulevards. But the countermeasures were not universal. Most scout cars remained vulnerable. And even those with modifications found that the traps evolved. American soldiers began positioning the cables higher, targeting the drive shafts instead of the axles. Others installed multiple cables in series so that even if the first was cut, the second would catch the vehicle. Some traps used barbed wire instead of smooth cable, shredding tires and disabling vehicles even when the axle remained intact. One German report, captured in September 1944, described the trap as a diabolical device that transformed every road into a potential death sentence. The report noted that scout car crews were increasingly reluctant to operate in hedgerow country, and that recon missions took 3 times longer than before the traps appeared. Artillery effectiveness had declined by 40% in some sectors, directly attributable to reduced forward observation. The tactical balance shifted. German recon operations became slower, more cautious, less effective. Artillery strikes, which depended on timely forward observation, lost accuracy. American advances accelerated. The hedgerow country, which had been a killing field for 6 weeks, began to open up. By August, the front had moved east. The spoke traps remained in place, silent and invisible, waiting for vehicles that never came. Engineers disarmed some. Others were left to rust. A few remain in place today, buried beneath decades of soil and vegetation, forgotten relics of a war fought with wire and steel. Leo Ward continued fighting until the war ended. He participated in the liberation of Brest, survived the Battle of the Bulge and crossed the Rhine in March 1945. He was promoted to corporal in October 1944, not for the spoke trap but for leading a successful night patrol that captured 3 German soldiers. He was never wounded. He never received a medal. He never spoke to reporters or appeared in after-action reports. He watched men die throughout the war. Not as many as before the spoke trap, but enough. He watched friends step on landmines, get hit by sniper fire and bleed out in muddy fields. He learned that innovation could save lives but it could not end death. That was a lesson he carried home. In March 1946 he returned to Kansas. The train ride from New York took 3 days. He stared out the window watching the country pass, feeling nothing. When he arrived in Hayes, his father picked him up from the station. They shook hands. His father asked if he was all right. Leo said he was fine. They drove home in silence. He used his GI Bill benefits to purchase a grain mill on the edge of town. The mill had been abandoned since 1943, its machinery rusted and broken. Leo spent 6 months rebuilding it, replacing gears, rewiring motors, and fabricating new parts from scrap. He worked alone 16 hours a day, saying little. In 1947 he married Clara Hoffman, a schoolteacher from Salina who had moved to Hayes to teach at the elementary school. They met at church. She asked him about the war. He said he had been in France. She did not press. They married in June. The ceremony was small. 15 people attended. They had 3 children. 2 boys and a girl. Michael, born in 1948. Robert, born in 1950. Susan, born in 1953. Leo was a quiet father. He did not yell. He did not lecture. He taught his sons to fix machinery, showing them how to diagnose problems and fabricate solutions. He taught his daughter to balance accounts and manage inventory. He was patient and methodical, never frustrated when they made mistakes. He worked 6 days a week, fixed machinery when it broke, and attended church on Sundays. He joined the Lions Club, volunteered at the fire department, and served on the school board for 12 years. He was respected in the community, known as a man who kept his word and helped neighbors without asking for payment. But he never spoke about the war. Not to his wife. Not to his children. Not to the veterans groups that sent him invitations every year. When people asked, he said he had been an infantryman in France. Nothing more. His children grew up knowing their father had served, but they never learned what he had done. His grandchildren asked questions. He smiled and changed the subject. In 1987, a historian researching the 29th Infantry Division's combat operations contacted Leo. The historian, Dr. Ellen Mercer from the University of Kansas, had found references to improvised anti-vehicle traps in unit after-action reports and wanted to interview soldiers who had seen them in use. Leo agreed to a phone call. He answered questions politely. He confirmed that the traps had existed and that they had been effective. But when Dr. Mercer asked if Leo had built any, he said he did not remember. The conversation lasted 14 minutes. Dr. Mercer thanked him and moved on to other interviews. She published a book in 1990 titled, Innovation Under Fire: Improvised Weapons in the European Theater. One paragraph mentioned the spoke trap, describing it as an effective but short-lived anti-vehicle obstruction used in Normandy. The paragraph did not mention Leo Ward. Dr. Mercer did not know his name. No one had told her. Leo died in 1998 at the age of 74, from complications related to pneumonia. He had been ill for 2 weeks, refusing to go to the hospital until Clara insisted. He spent 3 days in intensive care, his breathing labored, his body failing. His children visited. His grandchildren came. He smiled at them, squeezed their hands and said nothing. He died on a Tuesday morning just before dawn. Clara was holding his hand. The nurse said he went peacefully. Clara believed that. She wanted to believe that. His obituary appeared in the Hayes Daily News on Thursday. It was 4 paragraphs long. It mentioned his service in World War II, his work as a grain mill operator, his years on the school board, and his membership in the Lions Club. It listed his survivors. His wife of 51 years. 3 children. 7 grandchildren. It did not mention the spoke trap. It did not mention the scout cars. It did not mention the men who lived because a farm kid refused to follow rules that killed people. But the men who survived remembered. Some wrote letters. Some visited Kansas. Some told their children and grandchildren about a quiet private who saved lives with rusted metal and wire. A few brought photographs. Old black and white images of wrecked scout cars, twisted axles, and cables stretched across dirt roads. One veteran, a former sergeant named Michael Alvarez, attended Leo's funeral. He did not know the family. He had never met Leo's wife or children. But he had served in Leo's platoon in 1944, and he remembered the night Leo installed the first trap. Alvarez had been on watch, hidden in a foxhole 50 meters from the road, when he saw Leo working by moonlight. He watched Leo stretch the cable, anchor the spike, and test the tension. He did not say anything. He did not report it. He simply watched and hoped it would work. The next morning, when the scout car flipped, Alvarez understood what had happened. He found Leo later that day, pulled him aside, and asked if he had built the trap. Leo looked at him, said nothing, and walked away. Alvarez never asked again. But he remembered. After the service, Alvarez approached Clara and handed her a folded piece of paper. It was a handwritten note, 3 sentences long. Your husband saved my life in France. He built something that worked when nothing else did. He never asked for thanks, but he deserves it. Clara read the note. She did not understand. She asked Alvarez to explain. He told her about the scout cars, the doctrine, the deaths, and the trap. He told her that Leo's refusal to obey orders had kept men alive. He told her that soldiers still talked about it, decades later, in VFW halls and reunion dinners. He told her that at least 24 men owed their lives to Leo Ward, and that number did not include the men saved indirectly, the soldiers who survived because artillery strikes became less accurate, because recon operations slowed, because the Germans lost their eyes in the hedgerow country. Clara folded the note and put it in her purse. She thanked Alvarez. She cried quietly in the car on the way home. She never mentioned the conversation to her children. She did not know why. Perhaps because Leo had never spoken of it. Perhaps because some things were meant to remain private. Perhaps because she understood, finally, why her husband had spent so many nights staring out the window, silent and distant, as if watching something no one else could see. She kept the note in a drawer beside her bed. She read it sometimes late at night when she could not sleep. And she thought about the young man Leo had been, the one she had never met, the one who had built a trap from junk and saved lives while refusing to take credit. In 2003, 5 years after Leo's death, a museum in Normandy opened an exhibit on improvised weapons used during the invasion. One display case featured a spoke trap, reconstructed from photographs and veteran testimony. The placard described it as an effective anti-vehicle obstruction developed by American soldiers in June 1944. The placard did not mention Leo Ward. The museum curator did not know his name. No one had told her. But the trap was there. Cable. By anchor. Silent and anonymous, just like the man who invented it. Because Leo Ward understood something that doctrine did not. Survival is not about following rules. It is about solving problems. And sometimes the best solutions come from people who refuse to accept that nothing can be done. The spoke trap is not taught in military academies. It does not appear in engineering textbooks. No monument commemorates it. No museum displays it with Leo's name attached. But it worked. And men lived. In the hedgerow country of Normandy, beneath decades of soil and vegetation, fragments of cable and rusted spikes still remain. Farmers occasionally unearth them while plowing fields. Historians occasionally find references to them in old after-action reports. Veterans occasionally remember them during interviews, their voices quiet, their eyes distant. And somewhere in those memories, Leo Ward still exists. Not as a hero. Not as a legend. Just as a 20-year-old farm kid who watched his friends die and decided to do something about it. Who built a solution from junk. Who ignored orders that made no sense. Who saved lives and never asked for recognition. That is the only legacy that matters. The trap worked. Men lived. And a quiet man from Kansas went home, raised a family, and kept his silence until the day he died. Because some victories are measured in lives saved, not medals earned. Some innovations are born from desperation, not planning. And some heroes refuse to be called heroes because they know the real measure of a man is not what he says about his actions, but how many people survive because he took them. Leo Ward never wanted his name remembered. But the men who lived because of him will never forget.